Hemshech Ayin Beis, Volume 1. We concluded chapter 71, and hopefully we shall enter into chapter 72, which is Discourse 19. Second day of Rosh Hashanah, Tafresh Ayin Gimel, Ani L'Deidi V'Deidi Li, which is not such a common beginning for a Maimer Rosh Hashanah. It's usually an Elul, but here it's the second day of Rosh Hashanah. But I wanted to review and add some things to. I want to share some inside information in chapters, the last few chapters. So, firstly, just a summary. An easy way to categorize the last few chapters is really an interpretation in Boruch Sha'amar, the opening of davening, or more specifically, Psukkah de Zimra. So, the explanation in Baruch Sha'amar, which essentially can be defined as being a meditation, a contemplation, a processing of understanding the relationship, God's relationship with us, with existence. Remember, we're not talking about God's relationship with God. We're not even talking about God's relationship with souls or with Torah or with His desire for a dir b'tachtein, because that's all God, God's own. It's a relationship with Himself, really, if you call it a relationship at all. We're talking about relationship with existence, which poses a major dilemma. This is what I want to elaborate upon, and I'll tell you some things I saw in the sources of the Ayin Beis material. I researched a bit more about Baruch Sha'amar, where it originates in the Alter Rebbe. I haven't finished, but I found some fascinating stuff, some real explanations that tremendously can help understand some of this stuff. I'm assuming those explanations are from the Alter Rebbe himself, but it could also be some Chassidim writings. I'm not sure, because as I mentioned, the Alter Rebbe, besides Tanya, did not write the rest of his discourses. He said them, and they were put on paper, committed to paper by primarily five writers. I mentioned them. The Mariel was the Alter Rebbe's brother, the Mittler Rebbe and Rav Moshe, the Alter Rebbe's sons, Rav Pinchas Rezes, it's called Hanochas Harab, and the Tzemach Tzedek. There may have been more. I didn't do complete research, but those are the five primary ones. So everything we have from the Alter Rebbe, this is vital because the Alter Rebbe is the foundation of Chabad, Chassidus, comes from these five writers. Besides Tanya, I'm not talking about Tanya. And in some cases, the Alter Rebbe looked over these discourses, like the Siddur that I mentioned, the Siddur Imdach that the Mittler Rebbe published in his lifetime. He writes that the Alter Rebbe reviewed. The editors, Rabbi Matasov and others, comment on that, because they couldn't find actual edits of the Alter Rebbe, so it means that he reviewed it and just approved it, or that maybe he reviewed it and gave comments orally, or he maybe have written stuff and we lost it. But in other words, my point is the Alter Rebbe did look over material, and there's sometimes in Torah you'll find one place that says this is the Ksav Yad Kodesh from the Alter Rebbe himself. I'm only stating because I think it's good to know, because that's really the canon of Chassidus Chabad begins with the Alter Rebbe.
That's really the Mittler Rebbe Siddur.
No, it is the Mittler Rebbe Siddur, because Mittler Rebbe wrote it.
Yeah, it is.
But it's what he heard. He writes in his introduction. This is my Morim he heard from the Alter Rebbe at different times, and he organized it according to the Pirush of Siddur. So, point being, so I looked into this. So there's a few places that Baruch Sha'amar is discussed. The Siddur, of course, is the main place. It's different, but when you really study it, you see very, very strong similarities to the ideas. It's just on a different level. I mentioned this already, that Baruch Sha'amar and the Alter Rebbe's, that in the Maimer, it's Matis Maseh Tovkuf Samagdal, is when the Alter Rebbe said that. There he speaks from Ak and lower. Baruch Sha'amar begins in Ak, and he moves all the way down, based on the Arizal, the Siddur Arizal. The explanation we're learning, and that explanation was cited earlier, if you remember, in chapter 23. The explanation we're learning is much higher and begins before the Tzimtzum.
Wasn't every level the same repetition?
Yeah, but here specifically you find this in actual these two interpretations. But it's very clear to me when you start reading the interpretation. The original interpretation is based on the Arizal, which in a way is more grounded. But when you read that, you realize that Baruch Sha'amar is the process of how, from an etzem that's beyond anything, because that's what he says there also. He just begins with Ak. But basically, if you really go to the root, that's what he says, the Sheirish, it really begins obviously before the Tzimtzum. But there's a lot you can derive from that. So there's the Siddur, Then that's the Mittler Rebbe's. Then there's that same discourse you find Rabbi Moshe, the Alter Rebbe's son, wrote it. Interestingly, with a lot more explanation in some pieces. I'll share some of that now. And you have the Tzemach Tzedek, and you have some other variations of this discourse. Each one adds very tremendous elements to it. But the most thing I was most amazed was I found one mimer that actually explains it in a way that it makes it a lot easier to understand. So, bottom line is, Baruch Shamar is about the relationship of existence in the world. So what's the dilemma? Let's talk about the presenting dilemma. I think it'll help tremendously because I saw some questions we all had. But
the origins of Baruch Shamar is Piska Nachas V'Shmaya? Is that?
No. The origin, oh, you mean to say the origins in Halacha?
No, the actual paragraph of Baruch Shamar. Did you hear that before? It's in Shulchan.
Baruch Shamar is not a pasuk. It's composed by Anshe Knesset Gdela based on.
That's what I'm saying. It's Lamdavke. I heard that was Piska Nachas V'Shmaya. You ever heard that?
No. You mean to say that they heard it from who heard it? Who? I mean, you have to. There's fun that have Mekados of Tefillah. What do they say? What is Shara Kael? He must say. What's the Pishkum? Who was Mekabelet? When is the first documentation of Baruch Shamar? That's the question. I didn't really research that, so that would be interesting. Absolutely, if you can look into it, I definitely pose that because it's good, interesting. You know what we were talking about. If you remember, the Mittler Rebbe brings straight that the Arizal says that Baruch Shamar v'Hoya Elam is Ak. What do you call it? Remember? And then he goes to Galgalta Da'arich, Moiches Tema, Moichin, etc., etc. But the point I wanted to make was, let's start with the initial point of departure. The presenting dilemma of all of Ayin Beis and all of Chassidus, Kabbalah for that matter. But Ayin Beis is very clear, the interface. What's the dilemma? The dilemma is, I've said it many times, obviously the dilemma is, how does the finite meet the infinite? How does the divine meet existence? But let's spell out the dilemma even more bluntly, something we all can relate to. The dilemma is, existence is a yesh. Its definition is yesh. We all have self-interest. We're driven by self-interest. Just look at the extent of how some scientists and philosophers completely deny anything but survival of the fittest. That all is, as Richard Dawkins writes, the selfish gene. It doesn't capture more what yesh is. A selfish gene, not selfish human being. The gene is selfish. Our genetic makeup is selfish because the gene, all it wants is survival. It will do whatever it takes to survive. If it has to cooperate with others because it needs it, so that's what it needs. But it's driven by preservation. So that's what we would call the ultimate of a yesh. Aniva afsied. Me and nothing else. What are the consequences of that? Let's take it to the logical conclusion that I would kill anyone for my interest. The only reason I wouldn't is I'd get caught. Other people can kill me before I kill them. So we create a system of red lights and green lights to preserve our lives. But even evolutionists write that even cooperation is also, the gene has determined it's in its interest. Because not everyone, it can't do the job alone, so it needs a spouse. It needs someone to gather the wood. It needs someone to build the house. I can't do all the jobs myself, so some of you do jobs. I pay you for it. We have an exchange of resources, and that's where we have the whole economy and so on and so on. But the bottom line is, we're selfish bacteria looking to survive. Take away all the sophistication, strip it away from all the sublime and glorious and thing. It comes down to a bunch of billion-year-old bacteria just simply hunting, breeding, protecting their young. I mean, that's a raw definition. It's not, I'm not exaggerating it. It's pretty much, when you read things like Richard Dawkins, you read Schopenhauer, you read some of these radical philosophers who just say, the whole thing about romance, they say is human illusions. You know, bacteria, animals just simply meet. They don't need to have bars. They don't need courtship. They don't need romance. They don't need museums. The whole thing is just a quirk of nature, simply because humans develop minds, so it doesn't like past. So they don't just, two bacteria meet and they do what they got to do. Okay, and bacteria don't really breed, but two animals, by us it became a whole thing. I'm giving, this is the prevalent view of the Western way of thinking of life. No one's going to really spell it out quite this way, that it's selfish. So it's, Of course we see a lot of nobility, and you see people being kind, and you see parents crying for their children, and people do sacrifice. But it comes down to it, if you really want a scientific view, and you read some of these, they say that's all because people need to feel a little better about themselves, etc., etc. But it comes down to it's raw survival, and that's what it is. And some prove it even. I'm making the case, some prove it. Look, push comes to shove. Put a few people together with limited resources, and they fight for the same piece of food. See what will happen then, where their nobility will go. Right, in other words. So when we live in this so-called comfort zone where you don't have to be tested, put them up in an avalanche. And there's no food, and the only thing they have is each other. What happens is some turn to cannibalism. And then, of course, the mind experiment is, the challenge is, what would you do? If you were, who would know? God forbid, no one should be tested if you're tortured. We know that in the Soviet Union, other times, capos, they were tortured for their own survival. They turned their own brothers and sisters in. It's very embarrassing, humiliating, and then later people deny, whatever, but some people stoop to the lowest for their own protection, and that's it. For Jews, the capos in the concentration camp were worse than the Nazis, because they were their own. I don't know if you ever saw Shoah, that long thing, that 9-hour show from this. So when he starts interviewing the people who shaved their heads, it's like chilling, because they knew what was going on. They were shaving the heads of their own families or their own communities, and starts asking them, do you know why you were shaving their heads? Where was the hair going? These stupid little details, but they reveal the cruelty of it all. Anyway, the point being, and obviously I'm not going to concluding, so nobody should stop watching this right now, because it's not my theory. This is take out Torah, God from the picture. I see no reason why a person can't make a very strong argument for that type of preservation and survival. And that's yesh. That's yesh in the fullest way. If you read it in Tanya, what does he say? Tachtenim. Tachtenim, what means tachtenim? Begili elikus. To the point, had the helam v'hester, cheshach kofel mechupel, mole klippes v'sitra achra, at shehem neged ritzene, till they go aniv afseid. In other words, it's a gradation. I wouldn't say that a person is born in the worst coarse way, but when you see a cold murderer out there, and someone who's just doing whatever he wants at the expense of others, it's really a result of the yesh. And just some people just don't take it to the extreme, and some do.
Certain insects, like bees or something, accept self-sacrifice all the time, the queen especially.
Okay, well, something, the way the evolutionists would say, because that's the survival of the species. So they'll sacrifice their individuality for the species. Yeah, I'm just telling you this. I read even things like laughter, even things like religion and transcendence. Evolutionary theories will say it's necessary for the species to feel that they believe in something, because then people are more efficient. They don't, when they get depressed, they turn to God. Even God is a creation of nature's need to survive. You can explain everything this way. I read the most sublime things, music, the most transcendent elements that you would consider to be divine, is dismissed as being just another thing. This is classic evolutionary theory. This is what everyone talks about. Every biologist is trying to figure out how everything we do, they're basically taking every noble thing we did as part of our preservation, even when we sacrifice ourselves. Anyway, the point I'm making here, this is yesh. So what's the counterforce to this? So someone will say, Torah, what's Torah's response to that? That the yesh is the enemy. We have to do everything possible to destroy this yesh. You have to realize you're not self-made. You came from somewhere. God put you here. You can't just follow your whims. You don't just get up and just eat and do whatever you indulge. You have to take the yesh that by nature, left its own accord, without discipline, would know, who knows where it would go. You have to discipline it. You have to harness it. You have to control it. You have to limit it. All the different things and that's Torah. And that's Yiddishkeit. It fights the yesh. That could be a philosophy. That's one. Was anything wrong with what I just said? But there's one problem. Then this whole world is simply a test that we have to avoid, and when avoiding it means eliminating it and reconnecting to the God that's invisible to us, which means there's no refinement of the world. The whole concept of Dirah B'Tachtenim does not fit into what I just said. The concept of the yesh being transformed into something, no. Achdus Hashem what I just said is based on negating existence. So we have existence that is selfish, and you have God and God's values as on this side, and they're pitted against each other, and they cannot meet.
It's kafi without his hafka.
Essentially, it's kafi without his hafka. On a deeper level, it means God's unity is by negating the individuality, the personality, whatever, all the inclinations of our existence. Now,
but based on this shita, basically there's like a duality.
Yeah, that's one of the problems with this. Or you have to say that it's a duality in our mind. I mean, you get rid of Elam Hazeh, duality is not as gone. There's ways to explain it if you force it. I'm not going to go now and make a whole case. I've made this why we can't say this way. One of them is this issue. Achdus is definitely, you could say that, but that goes back to the Mikubalim. You could say then, okay, so our relationship is either not with God, because existence for existence to reconcile with God, you have to either compromise God or you have to compromise existence. That's the thing. Ultimately, there's no question with the Arizal and Chassidus Chabad. The goal is the Achdus is seen as a far deeper Achdus, and that though the Yesh does have its inclinations, and an argument could be made that it has its selfishness, but ultimately the Yesh also was created by God, to the point where the Alter Rebbe says Yesh HaNivra is created only by Atzmus. In other words, it's even its selfishness that it feels it has no cause and no source, also has a divine source, which is the essence itself. And bottom line is, Achdus has to permeate existence. In simple terms, it means that you can meet God with your individuality, and with your personality, and with your yesh. That doesn't mean you don't have to do anything. We're not talking about no avodah. There's plenty to do. What you have to do is direct your life toward godliness. That's a given. But it doesn't mean annihilating this yesh, because, in other words, the yesh is not the enemy per se. It has forces in it that can go anywhere. You see, the fact that I even presented a case, the first option, the fact that some people feel that, you right away see where it can go. But it doesn't have to go there. So we have a third option. In other words, it's not the second option where you have to give up existence, individuality. I'll put it in other words. People would always ask about the Rebbe. People ask me always, does the Rebbe know I exist? I know that he knows in his general Klal Yisrael and all the neshamas, and in the big picture, of course he has the picture, so the picture has every neshama in there. Does he know that me, Simon Jacobson, you, Tzvi Lang, etc.? Does he know that I exist and what I do? Like your brother would know what you're doing, or your father, or your mother.
Or even more, anybody who went through the lines of dollars.
Right? Yeah. Right, exactly. To take it a step beyond, the Rebbe's a tzaddik, Shama Klolos. Does God know? Does God know specifically what I'm doing right now, as if today I'm going to go walk here, walk there, and so on? Yeah, in the big picture, we have no doubt God knows. Of course, He has the big picture. Machshava Gdum Da'ak, Lifnei HaTzimtzum. Of course, He has the picture. He definitely wants the results of it all. We said, God wants the pleasure of our avodah. But the daily struggles I go through, not where the end of my life. Not the It's nice to say He knows we only know the details and God knows the full picture. But does He know the details? That's the question. The full picture He knows, and we don't know the full picture. But does He know the details like we know the details? So you can make the argument, that God has a bird's eye view, and a bird's eye view by nature does not know it from the bottom. I'm not, God forbid, saying that God cannot know it from the way we know it. But that's not what matters to Him. What matters to Him is the results of it all. Or like the whole thing, all 6,000 years of history, He wants to know that the team did what they had to do, with ups and downs here and there, and so on.
They saved them a few times.
Yeah. No. Okay. Now, one second. We know the concept. God is with us in our pain, and so on. But what does this mean? Is that just a consolation? Is it Again, I'm not trying to make God human, because that's not the point here. The point is, how much does He identify? Does God's presence, identity, identify with our identity? It's in a subtler question what I asked before. Before, it's the yesh. The yesh is clearly an enemy to God. So there you could argue, listen, it's an enemy to God. How could God, like the Talmud says, I and an arrogant person can't rest under the same canopy. But here, let's not even talk about the yesh. Just individuality. Why would it? God by definition is not defined by details. So because we are small little insects, so we work our lives in details. God is interested in the bigger picture. Again, I'm not talking about atzmos now, where he encompasses everything. We're talking about some type of relationship. We sit with God at the table, and he'll understand my issues, so to speak. Can you have a conversation like that with God during davening? That's the question. Or is it more the kavanah and the higher purpose, and then and he sees the good within all the challenges, etc. This is the dilemma. And I would say, in just one line, all Kabbalah, the whole concept of Seder Shtalshelus and Eshes Sfiros is all coming to answer this dilemma. If there was no Seder Shtalshelus, no Sfiros, there's no meeting point between us and God. There's no meeting point. Because there's no relationship from him to us, and there's no relationship from us to him. Because we're made up of Chesed and Gvura and Chachma and Bina, and he's not. So he doesn't identify. Yeah, he created it all. It's all part of his instruments, but he's not connected to his hammer and nails and screwdrivers. He's connected to what you want to build with the hammer and nails. Don't get me wrong, the hammer and nails are also part of God's reality because he created them. But they don't identify with his identity. He doesn't care about the hammer. He cares about what you build with the hammer. He wants the home. The dira b'tachtenim. You need to have hammers. I'll do whatever it takes. But when you say that the spheres, and that's the whole question, are the spheres elikus or not? Are the spheres divine or not? And where the Baalei Niglas come to the Mukabalim and say, so who are you davening to? Because if you give divinity to Chachma and Bina and Chesed, then you're davening to the spheres, you're davening to God. So this becomes the big challenge. Are the spheres godly? If they're godly, are they replacing God, God forbid? Are they like some type of interface? Their interface? This is the dilemma. So briefly you can say, okay, the containers are so-called in the created domain, creation domain. The oyers don't have shape and form. They just take on shape and form like the tinted glasses, etc. I don't want to go into that right now because that we discussed. I want to bring it back to here. And this is where the big issue comes down of why can't you just say that in Atzmus he wants a world and the Ratzon for Eilumus is in Atzmus? Because then you're giving a problem. You're giving Yeshus, I said yesterday with Avodah Zarah. Then you're giving the Yeshus and identity of the existence godly features. And that they're not. They have the ability to be a Yesh and they're separate on their own. On the other hand, there is a relationship. So Atzmus himself is removed from existence. But there's a relationship that he, at some point, within the thing, has a relationship where he begins to identify with us. And on that level, we can have a communication that he does relate to us in a very specific way. Atzmus, again, is nothing to talk about. Atzmus is a relationship. No relationship means nothing. He could be with us, not with us. That's not something we can relate. That's completely Atzmus domain. We're talking about, just like you and I are speaking about our details of our lives, yes, there's a state where we're in existence. In Atzmus, in Ein Sof, arises the desire for existence. Really means that he has some relationship with it. Now, I'm taking what I'm saying right now. I read this Rabbi Moshe's Hanocha, the Alter Rebbe's son of this whole thing with Boruch Shamar. And then I found another Hanocha, which was Hanocha that's very, very fascinating, where he talks very much about really three levels. He says that there's we spoke about it, but it spells it out specifically. Much confirms a lot of what we spoke about. He speaks about the unconscious, by the way. He says there's a helam that's only a helam relative to us. Like, for example, you have conscious intelligence. You have to conclude. He even says an expression in Siddur, he says, where did that intelligence come from if there's nothing behind the wall, behind the door? But he calls that helam hu, Baz Baruch Hu. It's a helam, but he gives an example in another mimer. He says it's like a person you were just here in this room, then you left the room. I know you exist, but I can't call you Ato, I call you Hu. That's the Alter Rebbe's example. Of a person who you just met, then he leaves your presence, so then you can't say Ato anymore, but you say Hu. You cannot say he doesn't exist, you can't say he's fundamentally concealed. That is what he calls the second level, Baruch Hu, what he calls Galgalta Da'arich. So Reish and Atzalim. It's beyond the spheres, but you know that it's there. You know it's Metzias, not it's Muhus. Then he says there's a level of Reisha Deloyis Yada. And he uses words like this. You like this. Very quantum-like words. He says, it's not that it doesn't know anything, it's beyond the relationship with knowledge. If you don't mind, give me that sefer there. I just want to read one line from Rabbi Meisha. I found it to be Nedidik. It's hard to know what the Alter Rebbe said because these are Hanochas from them. So whether the Alter Rebbe actually said this or didn't say it. Bring me the bag with the battery because I think I have to change the battery.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, this is I'll go back. This is Baruch Shamar in the first Pirush, but it's applied also. It's clear that you can apply it also to the other Pirush.
What about this question?
Just one second. I want to just read this 1 second. Let me just. No more. Okay, hope so. I think he's going to die. She says a language like this. He says like this. When we say Baruch Shem V'El Elam, he's basically saying that you, God, who on your own does not have relationship with us, because we are completely beyond us. You should have a Omar, speak and relate to us. That's what it means. I mean, we read this already, but he says it specifically. I'm reading Shalei at this level. One second. And then a few other places. I just translated. So the point is that, bottom line is that the first step, and this is the key. In the last chapter we learned this is Rosh Hashanah, that we reawaken the desire for Elamus. So we're talking about the relationship level. That Atzmus wants existence, we know that. That he wants the pleasure that comes from the B'tachtenim, we also know that. But a relationship with the details of existence, which should be seen as a means and negligible or unnecessary, that's Ratzon L'Elmus. And that is all the way in the root. That's the Baruch Shem V'Ha'elam. That's why that opening is so critical. Because it creates the first connection between the Lifnei Tzimtzum and existence. But it's in a state that's, as he said, no details.
It's insignificant. We're not proving yet that it's what he knows.
Well, it's significant because, once Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum wants a world, you already have a world that's rooted there.
He only wants a world because of the...
So then he doesn't need the Ratzon that he has without the Ratzon. That's fine. But then you don't need a Ratzon L'Elmus. Then you can he has the pleasure, and then the world's at some point after the Tzimtzum. He wants the world. So we're talking about now Ratzon for Elamus, the Ratzon for the building as you know it, the structure. The Ratzon, the desire, the pleasure is before the Ratzon L'Elamus. There would be no Eir and Sof altogether. That's an Atzmos.
So he slept along the world as a secondary.
That's the question. If he slept it along, you can say then at the end they dropped off somewhere. But if it's a Ratzon that's Lifnei Tzimtzum, and then that you're saying that Atzmus Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum desires this world, the Chetzenius we're talking about the worlds, then it's not just a negligible thing. It's a major difference. You could argue that the Ratzon L'Elmus is not rooted Lifnei Tzimtzum. That's what I'm trying to say. That's the point. In other words, so Baruch Shem V'Ha'elam is rooted that in the highest levels there is the so-called the beginnings of him imagining existence. Then comes Baruch Hu, where you have a level that is concealed, but it's relative concealment, because you know it's Metzius, you just don't know it's Muhus.
Which is what in...
That's Baruch Hu. That's the Sphere Sagnuzis. Yeah, that he states clearly. He states clearly, Sphere Sagnuzis is... it's concealed to us. We can't see it, but you can extrapolate. Just like you can extrapolate that you have a Koyach HaMaskil. you can also come to that
and you
conclusion.
cannot say the lois yada on that level.
Right. You can't say lo yada means the concept of awareness doesn't exist. It's just an etzem. It's also not atzmus, but it's that's Eid Ein Sof. That's lifnei elei sarotz. That's before. That's Boruch Shamar. Boruch Shamar is taking from Reisha de Leis Yada, from a state that is fundamentally unknowable to anyone. Knowledge is not even a reality there. Awareness is not a reality.
First level? I thought
That's
lois
the-
yada is kind of like a second or something. I don't know. That mixed up with it.
No, it's a level where there's no. He says Gili not feel not la'atzme,
I feel well that.
and there is Baruch Shoma. That's Reish Leis Yada. Gili that feel la'atzme. There's no Gili. It's like I said, like an etzem. When your etzem is there, but you're not thinking about it. It's there, but it doesn't need thought. It doesn't need consciousness to exist. It's not in a state of interaction. You see, consciousness is immediately an interaction between you and yourself. When you're aware that you're there, there's already a communication going on. You're speaking to yourself, so to speak. When you're not aware, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means you're beyond aware. It's like above awareness. When you say Hesach Hadas, Mashiach Bob Hesach, you don't mean L'mayla Medas. But there's the two levels. Anyway, I want to add one more thing.
What about the thing of Shinei? That if he knows every detail, doesn't that cause Shinei? I mean, like before he didn't know it.
You mean which level? You're talking before? If you're talking Atzmas, there's no issue there at all, because it doesn't know it the way we know it. It's not like it doesn't manifest. In Eid Ein Sof, there already gets, when the Rambam says, for example, his idea is not like ours, he's talking already on a lower level. Yeah, because the Atzmus, you don't have to say his idea is not like us. That's a double, you don't need to even go. He's saying that even when he's even when he's sitting with us and having a conversation, so to speak, and he's knowing it the way we know it, he also doesn't know it the way, because ultimately, Midias Atzmi Yedei Kolam Tzayim, or it's like Oyed. In other words, remember.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, but all the details of the struggles that you go through, it's all Meisif Shinei, it's all Meisif in his idea.
Well, this is why the example of Oyed comes into play. That from his perspective, it's still like Oyed. It's more complicated. The question is a good question. In other words, the point is there is going to be a paradox at the end of the day. When he is involved, when you're talking about the relationship, where the Eibishter has a relationship with us, even Eris and Kalim, there is an element of Shina at one end, but being that from his perspective it's all Eir does not affect the source. This is, remember the examples he spoke about the sun and the soul and all that, and he kept saying the sun has to shine. The soul is limited to a body. He says, but the Atzmus has all the milas of Eir without the chesenis of Eir. In other words, bottom line is it has both qualities. Eir is only an example of no shinui, but on the other hand, it works like a shefa. Remember, he said from our kakenu, it's a shefa. Kakei, it's Eir. This is ultimately a paradox.
Because our logic is based.
In other words, what you're saying is that he does have a relationship with us on our terms, but he's not affected by that relationship. Now, there is a level for sure. You have to say there is a shinui. That there's a negay, because negay, but it's not. It depends what you're talking. If you're talking about, let's say, when Mashiach will come, will there be a shinui in Atzmus? That now Dira B'Tachtenim has been fulfilled. You have to say that it fulfilled something. But you can't speak, you see, when you speak on Atzmus does not think in terms of something being fulfilled. Because the whole Dira B'Tachtenim is only from Atzmus' perspective. It's not about, I'm missing something and you fill. Remember I said yesterday, it's not about, that's the way we speak. From Atzmus' perspective, the Dira B'Tachtenim, all you can say is a fulfillment, but it's not about, it's like, yeah, but, I mean, to find words to say there's no shinui there, for me, it comes down to, remember, it's l'mayla mizman. It's, I think it needs a lot of havana to understand how something can.
We're stuck in Newtonian logic and stuff until we get to. It's always the point where we stop it. We stop the Newtonian as a normal cause and effect logic. Everything we're doing is cause and effect, and all of a sudden we get to a place where we just say we don't know, and that's what it's always.
No, but when you say it after you.
In this type of rationality.
But there's deeper than that. You could relate to it even on an atzmizdika level. I'm trying to. I mean, it's not really relevant to our discussion here, but. No, but I would say the following. If you remember when he spoke about Ratzon, he said, so Ratzon doesn't affect the Ratzon, doesn't give him contentment. Remember he says, it says Menucha. So he says the Menucha is not a Shinui. if you remember. The way I would describe it is something like this. The best way I could right now say it, explain it. There'll probably, more issues as we go along. When the Kavanah Al-Yena of Dir B'Tachtonim will be fulfilled, you can say, on every level, something will happen. So on the lower levels, there's no question, the Iris and Kalim will be aligned completely, just like you'd say, an unhealthy body found health, healed. So there's no question, there's a part of the body. Hold on, no, 1 second. The part of the body that's going to sense it clearly. A moment before, God forbid, there was a disease. I'm talking about Golus as a disease. I'm just giving you an example. And now the body is healthy. There was a blockage, God forbid, and now the blockage has been removed. The blood is flowing. What's the impact, let's say, on the Keiches Nalomim? So there too, you can say there's an impact. Before they were unable to manifest completely, let's say, in your eyes and your ears, because they were... But the impact already is much more subtle. On your actual arms and legs, you could say, I couldn't move, now I can move. The Keiches Nalomim, it's more of, it wasn't being able to be Nizgala, and now it could be Nizgala. You see already a much less tangible change. What about Keiches Atzmim? The Keiches Atzmim never needed to be revealed. So what happened now? So you have to say the Keiches Atzmim, being conscious of all this, will have a certain satisfaction from the fact that it's healed. But it's not because they are now being revealed, because they don't need to be revealed. The Neiches Nalomim are missing that type of expression. Right. The Keiches Atzmim is not lacking Gili, it's lacking fulfillment. And if you go to Atzmos HaNeshama, even deeper than Yechida, what happens there? You have to say that there's something that is fulfilled, but you can't call it Shinei because it didn't need to be expressed. In other words, what you're really asking is not so much how God relates to us. How does the Atzmos relate to Erein Sof Lifnei HaTzimtzum that manifest in Arotzen Le'elamis once those Elamis fulfill their purpose? So there you have to say, since it's Kulei and Atzmos, so for sure, there are levels that need to say, okay, I was missing something, now I got something. There are levels that say, I was not revealed, now I'm revealed. There's levels that say, I'm content with what it came. And then there's a level that you don't speak about. That's the difficulty. You're trying to figure out how Atzmos reacts to Dira B'Tachtein. Maybe it doesn't react. The word called reaction doesn't exist. It's almost impossible for us to relate to. That's why we're not Atzmos.
You're just making the question stronger and stronger. I don't think you're any...
I don't know. What you want Atzmos on your terms? That's not going to happen.
You basically, that's what
I made the question stronger. I thought I answered it, actually. Okay, it's interesting how we... When it comes to these levels, you use it for me as an answer. You a question. Very nice.
It's not the same thing. We have no idea what's going on there. So
I don't speak that way. That doesn't make sense to me.
Can I say that he's crying with me? He's laughing with me?
Let me say, what happens if I answered you both? He is and he's not.
That's probably the answer.
1 second. Is there a problem with that?
I mean, in terms of the big picture, no problem. But
no. What's the problem with that? Because you don't relate to opposites. Right. That's the problem. But Be'etzim, it's not a problem.
It's not the philosophy of the thing. No?
So that's going to be the ultimate answer. And when you're at peace with it, then you'll be able to see God's face. If you're not at peace with it, you're still in your limitations. This doesn't mean you don't understand. Why would you say that? You're making it sound like, so why don't you say the same thing about quantum? We just don't understand. You don't say that. Yeah, I don't. I say it like this. It depends how trapped you are in your way of looking at things. As soon as you realize that your way of looking is not the only way to look at it, you're right away open to. Who says, but I think paradox makes more sense than logic. If this table is a table and not a chair, to me, that's much more limited than saying it's a table and a chair. I just don't relate to that world because I'm a limited human being.
You say there's paradox and no paradox.
No, what happens is a place where paradox is not even paradox.
That's what I'm saying.
It's not paradox even.
Exactly. Paradox and no paradox.
So you can't relate to that.
I can relate to that because I can relate to that. And I understand it now.
No, but I can relate to that. It's more true than our reality.
Me too.
So that's what we need to know. So then what do you want? What else do you want? You want more than that? That's a gift of God's. Because He could have made it that we shouldn't even relate to the whole thing. We wouldn't even know that. Fine. I'm fine with that.
I'm very comfortable with this. Very comfortable.
However, here's a simple point. Had this been had never been a tzimtzum, we would never have emerged to even talk about it. Now we exist, right now we're sitting here, we have yeshus, we can do whatever we want, and we can go back to that place. That's the thing. The question, the chiddush here is not from Atzmus, the chiddush is that we should be able to relate to beyond paradoxes. That's the whole dira b'tachtem, that Atzmus can create something, nivdul matzmusei, he can do whatever he wants. But he wants that we should be aware. Now who's this we in Atzmus? You could say we don't even exist within Atzmus. But that's the Ratzon, he wanted something nivdul matzmusei. Let's put it this way, in Atzmus, nothing is separate from Atzmus. But he created realities where separation becomes real. That's what an Atzmus can do. It's a complete paradox. Because within Atzmus there's no something separate. Yet he created something that's separate, and it's really separate, and that separate reconnects all the way to that. I don't think this is a 1 minute or 5 minute or even an hour conversation. This is a process. You go through all these levels, it becomes easier to relate to. That's all I can really say. There's no question. Let's put it this way. Let's not talk about Atzmus now. Talking about the levels of Eir and self-definition that we're discussing, definitely refine your way of thinking. That goes beyond existence and helps you enter. That's all I would really say. That's where we're going. Because if he could jump there quickly, why would the Rebbe Rashab take us through this agony?
As you said,
go there.
As you said, we can understand, we can relate that there's something totally above us, and it's paradox, we accept it and everything. But when it comes down to Rebbe, as you always say, you don't understand.
So no, but the reason I resist what you're saying. The reason I resist what you're saying is because but it's not what I'm saying. I'm telling you, it's not what I'm saying. When I resist what you're saying is then why are we sitting here and talking about it? We should stop learning and go do mitzvahs. Why we talk? Why? Well, based on what you just said, my question would be, why learn about it? You come to this conclusion because what you're saying is not how I would put it. You see, you're saying it's not understanding. I'm trying to tell you that you can understand not understanding. And you need to work very hard to understand it. You're just saying, when a child says, I don't know, and when someone who learned all of Ayin Beis says, I don't know, it's not the same, I don't know. That's my point. So what you're saying is really, to me, I'm not saying that's what you mean. To me, it's almost like a cop-out. Since we don't get it anyway, so we're doing this out of Kabbalah sale. We're learning. The Alter Rebbe wants us to learn a little. No. Okay, well, that's where I said that. That's why I don't...
fun, healthy, and Kabbalah sale.
And I'm adding one more thing. It actually lets us on. I will say to you that we can come to the ultimate knowledge is to know that you don't know. So the Ikrim says that, and the simple interpretation is you come to know that you don't know, or how much more there is to know. And Chassidus says no, you do it in Leineda. You know that the unknowable. And I absolutely stand by that because to me if you take that away, we don't need the Alter Rebbe. What did Alter Rebbe achieve exactly? Telling us that everyone knew that you can't understand God? The whole Chassidus Chabad just tells us that we don't understand God. We know that. They knew it from the beginning of time. Ask Eve. Of course we don't know God. You don't need Alter Rebbe to teach us. He wanted us to integrate that we don't know God. It should be part of our knowledge, that you can own the nak. And by coming to understand that knowledge itself is not the only tool, and that knowledge can know the unknowable. You have inside of you right now, I have inside of me my etzem of my soul. Is that a knowable state or not unknowable state? It's an unknowable state. But there's a connection between our knowledgeable tools and that unknowable place. And we could connect, and that does not come easy. You can't just jump there. No way you can jump. You can't go into the Kodesh Kodashim without going through all the other levels. There's no way in. And that's what Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu. There's no way in. The only way in is through these steps. Even Tshuva doesn't take you to that place. Tshuva takes you like an express train. You made a mistake, sin, whatever. You can jump over and go back. You go to a deeper place. No, you go to a deeper place than regular avodah. 100%. As a matter of fact, in one of the Maimorim of, I think, another Maimor from Boruch Shamar, he speaks about Eimek b'teich Eimek. He says Eimek. Talk about the 10. There's a Shir Mal's Mamakim. So the Eimek Mamakim is 2. Eimek and Eimek. It says Eimek is Arich. Basically, what we're talking about, Baruch Hu, Eses first, Shir Atzmi B'Koyach, and Eimek b'teich Eimek is Radla. And he says the first Eimek is the Ratzon within every one of our faculties, and the other one is the Ratzon within the Ratzon. And then he goes deeper and says, even in Kesser you have the Ratzon within the Ratzon of Keser, and the Ratzon within the Ratzon within the Ratzon of Keser. And that's completely concealed. And through Tshuva, Yom Kippur, you reach Radla, and through and the rest of Aveda, you reach Arich. So, no, but what I'm trying to say is, what I'm saying is like this.
It might be a subject, and it might get I grapple with the point of Hester Panim and Ashgacha Pratis at the same time.
That's the question he asked.
If it says Panim, then how could it be that the Rebbe is like a law? Every person's individual struggles, let's say during the Holocaust, and there was a time of Hester Panim. At the same time, we say he knew exactly what was going on with every person at every moment. So then it's not.
I wanted to say one thing. I want to say this. I think it's important. You ever see the difference between somebody like an expert, a professional in a particular subject, and an amateur? Let's say somebody reads all kinds of books, let's say on surgery, on heart surgery. And then you have a heart surgeon who's been doing it for 20 years. There's going to be a big difference between that, right? Not just he has experience. One knows all the details, and he can repeat it to you. If you test him, he'll know it. But because he hasn't done it, there's lacking what's called the Eir Ha'el al Kolana. He has the details, like more book smart, but he doesn't have the picture, the invisible, the nuances in any given area of expertise. I think when we climb the ladder that we're discussing, we begin by a piece here, then we try to reconcile it, and we start building a picture. There comes a point when you learn Chassidus well enough, and you really do with Aveda, you climb, that you start getting the picture that has a lot more details and a lot of nuances. And this isn't just because you want to be thorough, because it's the only way to start understanding how God works. There are many levels, and many of them contradict. Initially, you don't even relate. You can't relate to it because it seems like, one second, it says here like this, and then here like that. What's going on? But then comes a point where you start seeing them, and not only don't they contradict, you start seeing, okay, they're all part of the puzzle, they're all necessary, there are parts where it works this way. I guarantee you that, and I just use medical surgery as an example, that medical surgery, that if we went with our book knowledge, you'll find contradictions. And the surgeon will say, well, when a situation comes like this, we do it like this. And say, what do you mean? But the book, he says, yeah, but then you see how one thing impacts another. And my point is that knowledge is not just accumulation of many details. There comes all kinds of things that come up that become like life. If someone asks you, what's life? Life is full of contradictions. But there are people who know how to ride through these contradictions. Why am I saying this? I'm saying you're absolutely right. And we all begin with these questions of God, Hester Panim, the Holocaust. And we never really have an answer. Because on one hand, you can say the whole Holocaust, this is God's mysteries, we'll never get it. And when a mother is crying over the loss of her children, you're not going to sit there and try to figure out rational, not because you're being sensitive, because what are you going to tell her? You have some explanation for this? As a matter of fact, the explanation is even more obscene than the initial tragedy. You're going to explain it also that innocent children, 1.5 million innocent children should have been burned in crematoriums in the Holocaust. Who can explain such a thing? Yet, on the other hand, we speak about the growth people come to. You read the Tzedek Aliyah, people come through growth through this. And it doesn't contradict the lack of knowing. The Rebbe has in a letter, I used it in my chapter in Torah Meaningful Life on pain and suffering. There's two aspects when you deal with pain. There's the emotional impossibility to fathom this. And the most brilliant mind cannot speak to a bleeding heart. Forget about it. It will never happen. And if you think you can talk to someone else, God forbid, someone themselves suffer, it doesn't matter how brilliant they are. Their heart is going to cry, and there's no way around it. I remember when the Rebbe spoke, very emotional sikha, one of the most vulnerable I ever heard the Rebbe being raw, the shleishim of the Rebbe Tzimchai Mushka. And he said then the following words. It was Pasha Para, shleishim. So he asked the question, the Medrash says, that when Moshe saw all the tumas, God gave him all the taras, tumas nida, tumas zov, whatever. Came tumas mes, niskarkam upon of Shomesha, his face became green, white, whatever, he started to tremble. What will be, how will you purify this? The Rebbe, I remember the Fabring vividly. I wrote it actually, and it was it was hard to even hear the Rebbe speak. He started saying, what bothered Moshe Rabbeinu? Moshe Rabbeinu knows the Eibishter takes and he gives. He knows just like he can make Tumah, he can make Tar, he can make Tchias HaMesim. The Eibishter, then he goes on, Moshe is Chochmeh D'Atzilus. He knew all the Biyurei Chassidus. This is what the Rebbe said. You read the Tzedek Chaliyah, and that what we see, we know Machshavei Sechem, and we only see the small picture. Suddenly he came, what is he? It was clear that the Rebbe was talking about himself, because he said, "Can Allah Biyurei Chassidus?" That's what he said. Yeah. Then the Rebbe's answer was fascinating. The Rebbe said, "Das redt man auf Biseichel." But when it says the gates there, then the heart cannot understand it. That's what he said. So all the seichel is all fine and good, but the heart, Moshe could not. He felt the death. It wasn't he was asking a philosophical question how God can heal. Of course, God can heal. Everything is possible. How can he could not relate to it? So the Eibishter said, "Zeis chukas atera." Here, I'll show it to you. That's the answer. He showed it with his finger. The Rebbe didn't get into the answer, but clearly some Gili Atzmus calmed Moshe down. Whatever it was. My point that I'm trying to say is, so if you ask a question, we have contradictions between our heart and our mind. Your mind, let's say, could understand that God is greater, but your heart hurts from it. Is God there when your heart is hurting also, or God is only there when you have the Havana? My point is, this is not. You ask a child who's linear is going to say either this or that. When you get older, you realize, something. There's multiple realities. I can be. See people who came out of the Holocaust completely destroyed, and they rebuild their lives. Ask them, how do they do that? That's a human being. We're not even talking about God. How can you, who lost your whole family, your wife and children, how do you even wake up in the next morning? Explain that to me. And they'll answer, I don't know. In the beginning, I didn't think it's possible, and then I just rebuilt my life. And some people didn't. And we're not judging anyone here. These things are paradoxes. I don't know. You see people who suffered unbelievably, where other people completely get devastated, and they move on, not because they're colder or detached or because it doesn't bother them. There are mysterious forces in the spirit, in the soul, that are resilient, that, to me, relating to that is not, I don't have to understand it. It's part of reality too. Since when is logic the final arbiter of reality? Jews survived. It wasn't based purely on logic. Then there's a logical part. Whatever you can do with logic. You see, to me, the mind, when I was younger, I overrated it. To me, the mind is one tool in the tool chest. That's all it is. Why is faith? Faith is not absence of reason. The modern enlightenment like to make believe that faith is absence of reason. Reason is everything. You don't have reason. Okay, I'll believe. Maybe faith is beyond reason. Not maybe, for sure. I'm talking about a little child who holds his parent's hand when he crosses the street and he believes in the parent. It's not faith. That's immaturity. That's childishness. It's good for that stage. Then comes a point where I always say this to people in very secular audiences. I said, let me ask you a question. Anybody here has fallen in love? Anyone married? Yeah. Tell me, marriage is an act of faith or an act of logic? So of course everyone starts laughing and saying it's an act of insanity, actually. Yeah, but you all did it. Why? But let's talk what do we say? What's our answer? Our answer is you date someone. Whatever the reasons why we need to date, whether it's a mitzvah, whether it's attraction, whether human beings need a companion, I'm not even getting into all the driving force. There comes a point, you got to know this person. We're talking about unhealthy. Then comes a point, do you go and commit the rest of your life with this person? Tell me, that act, what kind of certainty can you have? How do you know this person is absolutely for you? There's no way logically you could answer that. You could say, it's called informed decision. I did everything I could do with my seichel, with my emotions. It seems right. Now I have to take a leap. If someone's going to be, a computer will not take the leap. A computer will say, I got all the data is right. To make the move, you got to make the decision. It's like a boss has to make a decision based on what? Based on all the knowledge you have. And then there's a state where you'd make a move that is not purely logical. I wouldn't call it irrational. I would call it super rational. The mind has taught you, has come to you. You're going to stay on the fence, or you're going to enter the door. And there is an element of faith in that. That's my point. That I'm trying to say that so someone will say to you, okay, so explain to me love. Is it logical? The person you married, could you have married anyone? The answer would be, no, not really. This person had the qualities that allowed me to get to that door. Another person I may never even have wanted to go out again with. But they'll say, but maybe if this is a question, you can't even answer the question like that. Yeah, if I may have met another person and we also went through all the stages and I went through, that everything is possible. My point is that there's a lot of realities going on at once here. And I think that's why I believe one of the big values of learning this and also the davening, Boruch Sha'amar, each step, frankly, I think each step here is a psychological step of acclimating ourselves to a reality that's beyond our linear world. And when you do it, your kelim become more refined, and you do become a keli for more. So bottom line is like this. One thing is for sure, that Atzmos has it all, and impacted, not impacted, I will never maybe understand. Doesn't matter. But one thing, we are definitely limited kelim. And one thing is also sure, we have evidence that our kelim can expand. And things that today seem to you almost impossible to understand, with a little time you can begin to relate to it. Maybe even understand it. So why not say that since all these kelim and edus are built by God, that as you expand them, in them is embedded the DNA of Atzmos, if I could call it that ultimately when you do what you got to do, that will begin to inform you. And maybe at the end of the day, you don't find God, He finds you. Maybe at the end of the day, when you let all your tools, you use all your tools, you come to the door, and you put them aside, then something emerges, a reality that's beyond that you would ever have imagined. That's how I see it. What's Matan Torah at the end of the day? You count 49 days. The 50th day, you can't count. So you say, why don't you just give me the 50th? Doesn't work that way. You need the 49 steps. You need your kelim. Do that, then a reality emerges. Because within the kelim and eris of Atzilus, right, and within the eris and kelim of Bria and Yetzirah and so on, lies Atzmos. However, we don't see it. All we see is the structure. So I think when you climb the ladder, let's say from backwards, we go from Boruch Eisa Bereshis, through which is Atzilus, Eris, and Kelim, and you go to Boruch Gezer Mekayim, which is Yetzirah the Klolos, and then you go to Boruch Gezer Emer Ve'esa, Ak, and then Baruch Hu, the 10 hidden spheres, and Baruch Shama V'Haya Elam. I'm going backwards. You are essentially you're almost going back to the Big Bang. You're going back to the moment where it all began. I say moment, to the process, the beginning of the process, the beginning of the pipeline. You're going down the rabbit hole to where it began, where the process began. When I say process, a process we can relate to. The process began before there was a process. That's Atzmos, but that's a whole different thing. And I would say that if you're able to enter into Baruch Shem V'Haya Elam, the Big Bang, when you're there, you'll probably get a message from Atzmos, because you're right there. And that message is not going to come through your avodah. That will emerge. That's how I would put it. And when that emerges, you'll have the experience that you have, whatever it is. That's the only way to really. That's the key. When we say, for example, we go with our avodah with tam v'das, then you come to avodah l'mayel with tam v'das. So that's still our avodah, And then you come to a point where it's not even an avodah. There comes a point where Atzmos does his part. Or let's put it this way, you're a keli, so Atzmos emerges. Atzmos will emerge inside of you. You can relate to that approach. That's what it comes down to. So right, exactly. So as soon as you're talking, remember we were talking about, there's the Eir, the Gilei Lezulas. The Eir Mamala, Pnimi, was Lahoyer ala Elamis. Okay, so it has a function for worlds. So that's a relationship between the worlds and that Eir. There comes the Eir that's only Indian, is the Gilei Ha'etzem. It's still Eir. It's Makif, it's Rotzen on a lower level. So there too, it's revealing God. When you come to that point and you start saying, so what happens now with the Atzmos power? How am I going to get that? You're not going to get that in that way. Because that's already an experience that once you get there, then you relate to it in some way. And I don't think you can define it quite in that way. Quite in any type of a tangible, possible way. And the key thing is that we could get there with our kelim. You could enter as you are. As strange and paradoxical as that sounds. You couldn't enter in the beginning, but if you do what you got to do, because at the end of the day, the Eir HaGvul, the Eir HaBligvul, and the Keich HaGvul of kelim all have within them the same code. The one Achdus code of the unity. I mean, I think science today, technology, are very good examples for it, because they're coming to a unified point. All kinds of different systems all see that there's a unified message that connects them all. So, what tells 75 trillion cells, or billions and trillions of details in the fibers of existence that should all work together? Explain that one. I don't get that, but it's a reality every second. Right now, the sun goes up, Everything, the whole world just works in a very organized way. It's all different details. Who is the captain? So you have the ultimate paradox right there. Obviously, we're talking here on a much deeper level. Look, what I'm sharing right now is things, obviously, I've processed, I've learned, and so on. I don't think I can replace what you have to do. I can give you a little insight from where I'm down, what stage I'm at. But I think that it's really having these type of tools and methods that help relate it. I think the Baruch Shamar is an unbelievable, what's it called, meditation process of how something from nothing emerges. And it's true. We don't see the stage where the etzem becomes a rotzen. We don't see it even in ourselves. We don't even see where Koyach HaMaskil, Chachmas Tumah, becomes Chachma, let alone where etzem HaNefesh becomes a desire. We don't see it. It's true. But seeing is only a limited tool. But we can relate to it, and we're getting the picture. And when you start getting it, you can start imagining it. You don't want to see it. You don't want to see the way Chachma gets into Chachma, the way you see Chachma. You want to give up you have to give up your way of thinking to be able to understand that. There's no way. If you were able to go to Etzem HaNefesh and see it like let someone put it on the table here. Maybe that's why the Rebbe Rashab said that it'll be Magashim to show the plate. Because he realized they wouldn't be able to see it in Elokus. They'd think of it as okay, showing you a trick. Hey, I see you see a divine energy suddenly, glowing. We'd see it as we didn't see it as Elokus. I mean, that's maybe what he meant. The Rebbe Rashab said, "It will beweisen the Keich HaPel Benifel on the plate." You can't show someone that a magic trick. You can't show it because then it would be back in your terms. The whole point is seeing Elokus for Elokus's value, not right, not a trick. You're going to see. Let's say you're going to say a plate. You'll see instead of a plate, you'll see flames. So what happened? You saw nothing. You saw God that the Rebbe can do a miracle. Matbei Shalesh, whatever. Yeah, 100%. The heart of an Chassidus. I want to say one more thing in this chapter 71 that I found there. At the end of the Maimer, in summarizing, because this was even though it was a relatively easier chapter than the others, but it has its own complications. So in the chapter, briefly, he said that there's 5 levels of the soul. This corresponds to the 5 levels. Baruch Sh'amar B'Hayelam, and Baruch Hu is Yichida and Chaya. And this is, by the way, the first explanation of Baruch Sh'amar is very much this chapter, because it's the 2 levels of Keser. So Yichida is the higher level that's beyond altogether. No details. Chaya is already the beginning of the details, like the 10 hidden spheres. Then there's the 3 levels of Neshama, Refesh, Ruach, Neshama, afterwards, which is Baruch, Emer, Ve'oisa, which is already related to some reality, to existence. You have Baruch, Gezer, Mekayim, which is Ruach, Biyah HaKlolim, basically. And Asiya is Baruch, Eisa Bereshis. So then he began and spoke about the process of how this. So he said like this. In the beginning, the first time, this Baruch Sh'amar came from above, Chafetz Chesed. But then it comes through Araveda. I'm just summing up this chapter because I think there's a few key points I wanted to add. Okay. Now, the thing is like this. So existence itself, is it dependent on us or dependent on God? So first he says, well, the world exists even without us. God made the commitment, the covenant to Noach. So he says, no, but even that depends on Avodah. But then he says, Rosh Hashanah, everything expires, the energy, and then it has to be renewed. But the fact is the world is still there. But it's in a diminished way. That's the key. So he explains this like sleep. So the bottom line is, existence will have certain minimal energy based on God allowing it to continue, but it will be asleep. So what Rosh Hashanah, then what do we do? What is our role then? Our role is to awaken the Pnimius HaRatzon, the purpose for it all, because that is dependent on us. So it works like this. One second. So God wanted the world in order to be Adira B'Tachtenim. It should be Gilei Elokus. The first time He put it all in place. From here on, how could it be Gilei Elokus? It's up to us. God is not going to impose His revelation. So He puts the whole machine in place. Now the machine gets weaker and weaker and weaker until Erev Rosh Hashanah it falls asleep. Now, if nothing is done, technically, it'll be from now on asleep. It will be like it'll never wake up.
It gets weaker and weaker, or just this?
I said that. He doesn't say it gets weaker and weaker.
So it stops.
Yeah, fine. Every day is the same thing. The day ends, and the body goes to sleep. Technically, you're still alive, but you're asleep. So you could think psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, the world can exist, but it can be completely asleep, unaware of anything. Here's where Rotkir Shefer and the Aveda comes in. Aveda comes in to awaken the purpose of it all. Rotzen l'melucha, not the Rotzen l'elamis. Once there's a Rotzen l'melucha, the only way for melucha to be is you need worlds. For the Gilei Elokus to be possible, you need a world where you're going to reveal it. So the world is then now revived. In other words, when you wake up in the morning and you say Moida Ani, what you're saying is, I understand why you put us here, why you put me here. I am committed to revealing godliness. So God says, okay, here's another day. Here's your body. Now you have your body at full force. It's not asleep anymore. So the Ratzon La'elamis gets revived due to the fact that there's a commitment through Aveda for the kavanah of the Elamis.
Maybe the difference between sleep and being awake is the consciousness. Before you're not conscious, now you are conscious.
Okay, fine. Yeah.
Not only the physical aspect of it.
You could say that. There's a different way, yeah.
That's the whole difference.
Yeah.
We become aware of our purpose.
So that's what he says. Al Pisei the Ishtal is the air is mismayit. Exactly. What Adam did. And he said, the world is there, and they don't know what they're for. And then he says, yeah. In other words, the bottom line is, awakening the existence, existence itself becomes has more vitality when you are fulfilling its purpose. Or if not, which is obvious, because if you're spiritually asleep, you're also physically more asleep. That's the bottom line of what he's saying. Even though you see people moving around, but so then he says, okay, so the Shtalshlus gets weaker and weaker and weaker till the Gili is completely concealed. He said, Cheshach Av Kofla Mechupel, and that's why you need Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. You need Neres Lohoyeres HaCheshach, and that's where the human being comes in. Vehei Bracha. I'm just reviewing here what he says here, and that's through us first revealing it. And now comes what's the process? The process is first revealing it within yourself. So Boruch She'amar within yourself. Revealing Boruch Hamshacha of Amar V'Haya Elam within Elam Nosan B'Libam, and that in turn reveals it in the worlds, and you have the worlds become refreshed, and the Gili in those worlds becomes refreshed. That's what he said. But then at the end he said, remember we spoke, which way does it go? Does it come from us or it comes from above? So I look at the Maimorim, they say an interesting question they ask. That Al Mitla Rebbe in Siddur, and the same thing in the Maimorim of the other Hanochas, he asks a question like this. Al Pi Kabbalah and Al Pi Chassidus, seemingly Baruch Shama has two different meanings. In Kabbalah, Baruch Shama is the Gili from the Ein Sof, it should be Nizgala in Arotzen. In other words, Ak, or whatever level. The bottom line, there should be a revelation from a concealed dimension of the divine. It should become Haya Omer Va'ela, that you should have some. And then Baruch Hu is the next level, that you're revealing also the concealed. That is.
That's actually Baruch Hu in both cases, right?
Baruch Hu is the second level. No, Baruch Hu is. It depends. It's always the second level Baruch Hu. And he says these words. That's Al Pi Kabbalah. And Al Pi Chassidus is Baruch Shamar to reveal it within the neshama. And he asked that. And he says that's not a contradiction. They're Talia. Those are the words. They're interdependent. And he gives an example. It's a very interesting example. You know what he says? The example. He gives an example of a chavius, a barrel of wine or liquid. So when it's not full, it's not full. When it's full, it bursts open and spills over. So he said when there's a bigger gili, Baruch Sha'amar V'Haya Elam from Elokus, becomes Baruch Sha'amar V'Haya Elam, it also spills over into the neshama. So it also reveals the neshama. That's what the answer is there. In one mimer I found that it says Baruch Shama V'Elam, when it spills over from the Helam Ha'atzmi into the Gili, it also goes into Baruch Hu, it spills over into other levels. I would gather, I'm just saying this, I think the meaning of that is a lot deeper than just what I just said. I think it means that why is it Negeya in Aveda? That level of Baruch of Eid Ein Sof is a field of energy, and then arose a desire. Why is that Negeya in Aveda? In Aveda, that's our Etzem and Neshama should be revealed into our consciousness. So that's what he means. So in other words, when it spills over in the macrocosmic level, it gives power to spill over into the macrocosmic level, and vice versa. Here it's mashma both ways. When you do it and you're aware of it within yourself, the purpose of revealing godliness in your life and to push away all other desires, inappropriate ones, that reveals it also above. But then when he says, Kol Zeh Detesh Mamayla, it's very clear that when that idea that your mamshich baruch hamshacha into ha'oya elam is also in our personal aveda. That's, I would say, that's where yechida begins to emerge.
Why would we
so essentially, so it's basically on the macro, on the world, on a global level, and on a personal level. It's the same idea. But then,
why would we blow shofar before we do all this? Because what are we doing?
Well, there's many reasons. I mean, blowing shofar. Listen, blowing shofar comes with also saying the psukim of Malchus Zechrin. The psukim we say, let's say before shofar, is like we do the psukim before hakafas. You bring rayas from Torah. I mean, to make the tkir.
Why Boruch Shamar before shofar? We're bringing down a Russian that doesn't exist yet.
You mean what we do say Baruch Shamar before shofar?
No, we say it every day. That's
No, we don't.
You're asking me if the Baruch Shamar of Rosh Hashanah has a deeper? Of course it does. Look, he didn't go through the other tefillas. The Baruch Shamar is here's the connection of Baruch Shamar and Rosh Hashanah. I'm sure you can connect other prayers too. Shema Yisrael is Malchus. Baruch Shamar to me sounds like more like a we say Shema and Malchus, right? In the Psukim Malchus we say Shema, correct? Shem Echad, Baruch Shem. Malchus Zechrenis Shefris. Zekarnu Yem Rishon. Anyway, this is the meaning Zeh Yem Tchilas Masecha. This is the beginning of the purpose of creation, the Gili Elikus. Zekarnu Yem Rishon. So that's a Zekaron, which is what's a Zekaron is the Helam of that's concealed the Ratzon for worlds. So through awakening the purpose by fulfilling the revelation aspect, committing to the revelation, you create a new energy that goes through. You create Zekaron L'Yem Rishon, which is only a Zekaron because it's what he said. It's Helam on its own. Say so. What was the expression? Where's that expression? Later, Zekaron L'Yem Rishon. There's Zekaron L'Yem Rishon. Because Chesed is Haratzon. Because it's only Chesed Haratzon. It's only the Chesed Haratzon, which is now only asleep. But through connecting to the inner purpose, you also awaken that, and they have a rejuvenation of existence. Okay, well, as I said, we probably won't go to Ayin Beis, so I was right. Chapter Ayin Beis, that is. So we'll stop here. The summary, chapter 71, and the chapters before. I hope this was helpful explanation. Not today? Yeah. Let's stop right here. 1 second. I just did a summary of Maimer Discourse 18. Rosh Hashanah Maimer.